general commented that he didn't look anything like that. I disagree.
Bad AI, bad AI.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Mark Wilson, and I am the head of government strategy and communications at Applied Intuition's Washington, D.C.'s office. It's been a long 2 days. We thank you for sticking with us. Over the past 2 days, we've talked at the highest levels of foreign policy. We've talked defense policy. We've talked to entrepreneurs. We've talked about various stakeholders and the problem we're trying to solve. But what is the problem we're trying to solve? At the end of the day, this is 100% about getting the critical technologies and the tools in the hands of the men and women that we've asked to go do the nation's service. And that's what this is all about today. And I can't think of two better leaders than the two gentlemen to my left to represent that perspective and to have a discussion about warfighting and data and leadership. I'm honored to welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Christopher Donahue. He's the commanding general of 18th Airborne Corps. Previously, he served as the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, where he and his paratroopers twice deployed as part of the nation's immediate response force. One of our nation's most experienced special operations leaders, he had various duties, including the commander of Special Operations Joint Task Force in Afghanistan, commander of NATO Special Operations Component, and U.S. Joint Special Component and U.S. Joint Special Operations in support of Operations Freedom Sentinel. General Tony Thomas, the 11th Commanding General of Special Operations Command. Notably, General Thomas commanded Joint Special Operations Command. He also served as the Associate Director for Military Affairs at the Central Intelligence Agency, Commanding General, NATO Special Operations Component Command in Afghanistan, Deputy Director for Special Operations at the Joint Staff, and near and dear to me, he was the Assistant Division Commander of 1st Armored Division in Iraq, where he taught your moderator how to move at the speed of war at all times. If there were ever two men that I know that want to speak less about themselves and speak more about the problem, it's these two. So, gentlemen, we're going to dive right in. Yeah. So, General Donahue, we have a diverse audience here today. And could you tell us a little bit about the Corps, the mission, and kind of what you and your paratroopers do for the nation?
So 18th Airborne Corps is about 92,000 people, and it's the contingency corps for the United States military. So that's the first forces that the Army will provide to go out and to react to a crisis, but because of the size and scope of the capability that you have in that corps, you can move from crisis into campaigning. So truly sustained operations, unlike any other corps or like force that's out there, probably the only one in the world that can do that, just because of the unique capabilities of the U.S. military.
Yes, sir. And sir, can you describe for the audience kind of how your experience in special operations as the CG of the 82nd and leading up to now to the Corps, how those experiences have kind of shaped your views about how the joint force needs to leverage technology in warfighting?
So I think the first thing is, you're a product of your experiences and the people that, brought you up in the military. So the first thing is captain through now 3-star, I've deployed at almost every rank. So the first thing that is every 60 to 90 days, conflict changes. Every time I've ever deployed any rank, every 60 to 90 days, it's going to change. And you have to adapt and understand what's going on. If you cannot adapt, understand, and integrate something very quickly, your adversary will do it faster than you. So that in itself drives probably everything that you do.
Thank you, sir. General Thomas, over to you. Same question. How has your experience, your professional experience kind of shaped where you are today?
Thanks, John Mark. And first of all, thanks to the Applied team for the opportunity to be here today. Truth in lending, I'm an Applied team member, so a little bit of bias there, but thanks again for the opportunity. I'd also just have a point of order right from the beginning that anything I say is opinion ranging maybe to bloviating if I'm embellishing a good war story, whereas the gentleman to my right is current, he's factual. There are things he probably can't talk about, although I'm sure he will endeavor to try and keep you as informed as possible, but there's no better warfighter that I know of, and I'm privileged to be on the stage here with you. CD mentioned that and we have a shared formative experience growing up in special operations units, the Rangers and other special mission units. But the extraordinary opportunity there, besides working with some of the most incredible professionals on the planet who are really, really good problem solvers, is they drove us daily to adopt the latest technological development. Back in the days, this was night vision goggles and lasers and things like that, and maybe the occasional drone when it would come overhead, back in the day. But flash forward to the complexity of the fight now, that was a good early basis point, certainly focused on man-hunting back then, and it seemed we were always in search of public enemy number one, whether it was Noriega or Mohammed Farah Aidid or Pablo Escobar, you pick it, all the way up to the current, or the previous 20 years, it seems like distant history, right? The last man in Afghanistan can talk to that, where we were more oriented on networks, individuals, but inside a larger network and defeating these networks, and again, bringing all that technology to bear. So the good news is we've had plenty of reps over the last, my 39 years. I was in combat almost every one of those years, somewhere, somehow. Unless I was pushing papers here at the Pentagon or some job like that. But we had a lot of repetitions to get us to where we are now, and then it's in the hands of great innovators like CD and his team to take it to the next level with some really pressing threats, much more complex, ranging to existential threats, so it's kind of critical that we get it right.
Yep, thank you for that, sir. And one of the things that we've listened to for the past couple of days, people talk about this, this revolutionary change in technology and so forth. And I think that I've heard you say before, sir, in podcasts, at the end of the day, winning on the battlefield comes down to skill, comes down to courage, comes down to the morale of the combatants. But is this different? Is this wave of data, artificial intelligence, autonomy, is this a different type of technological evolution that you've seen throughout your career? And should we approach it differently and view it differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing is if you want to win, depend on what you're trying to accomplish. But for us, the U.S. military, generally speaking, we're an away team. We're going to have to go somewhere and then actually impose our will in any of the domains or all the domains and come out and accomplish what we're being asked to do. And that's hard, okay? That's really hard. Very few nations can actually do that. You're watching it play out across the globe. Obviously, if you're looking at Ukraine, you're seeing that up close and personal. So at the end of the day, we got a heck of a challenge ahead of us. Mm-hmm. But I'm actually pretty pleased with the direction that we're headed. A lot of work to go, but pretty pleased with where we're going to go.
And that's a theme that I've heard throughout the last couple of days, sir, is that we are moving in the right direction. There have been a lot of really positive developments in that area, not just from the warfighter's perspective, but within venture capital. The private companies in the private sector seem to be all rowing in the same direction, and that's a good thing. General Thomas, do you kind of share that same view? Is this evolution of technology different than those you've seen in your career?
I do believe that, and I think it's almost incalculably impactful. And just to put it in context, when I assumed command of SOCOM back in 2016, I'm a simple infantryman, so I was trying to make sense of a pretty complex command, distributed over 100 different countries in the world, 85,000 people in the mix, doing a myriad of missions. And so I bundled things into three categories of win, transform, and people. And I knew right away, first point of criticism was, hey, you have two verbs and a noun. And I said, actually, that last noun is more powerful. It's a powerful verb if you want to use it here. And I was actually arguing with wrestling with myself that I should push it forward. Humorously now, Brian Fenton, the current commander, his three priorities are people, win, and transform. So good news is he kept a paradigm for at least for the force to seize on. But back in that time frame, as I talked about people, everything from select, assess, and recruit, and retaining them, we were on to the verge of, and it was a random term. It's funny, as a senior officer, you can throw a term out, and it sticks, even if you didn't want it to. And I randomly threw out hyper-enabled operator one day. And I said, I see a future battlefield where it's an individual. Not even, an ODA is small at 12. Ranger platoon's a little bit bigger. We have larger formations. But I see a future world where it's an individual. Could be a logistician, could be an information operations professional, could be whatever, who can bring everything in the inventory to bear, kinetically, information, logistically, et cetera. And we played around with this a little bit. And I think this technology actually brings that to fruition, that with a distributed network and the right people, first and foremost, that you can bring all of that to bear to an individual, which to me, accommodates for a lot of your challenges in terms of mass and other things that are not going to be really what they were in the past. That's a preceding kind of conceptual approach that I think we need to kind of adjust our, leverage the technology and then adjust the kind of the principle of war that applies there.
And what we're really talking about, right, is there's so much information that's out there. Mm-hmm. TS, secret, unclass. It's all data. So how do you take that data and use it to your advantage? And that's really what, whenever General Thomas talks about his lines of effort, if you looked at my lines of effort, they're almost the exact same, right? So everybody knows, but now you have legacy equipment, you have the stuff that you're developing now, and then you have stuff that you're moving towards in the future. Mm. So how are you taking all this and then leveraging data to give you that advantage? That's really what the gist of this is all about at the end of the day. And who can do that's probably going to have the pretty significant advantage going forward. And just like General Thomas talked about, where you are in the world really doesn't matter, because you now have the ability to influence of what's happening wherever somebody's trying to physically hold some piece of terrain.
And John Mark, if I can,
please.
We've been wrestling the last 2 days on what matters. Getting technology, getting capability to the warfighter where the rubber meets the road at the speed of relevance. At the end of the day, that's the only metric, right? If we were a private company, that's what we'd be measured on. We are not good at it now. And what I heard yesterday, and I just want to foot stomp this because there's an opportunity here, but it's going to be for senior leaders to seize on it. Yesterday, the example was thrown out that do it like SOCOM. You heard former Secretary of Defense, do it like SOCOM, do it like SOCOM. SOCOM has no different authorities than any other combatant command. We do it at the special mission unit level, but that's not to scale. It's intended to allow them to run harder and faster, and we try and bring it into our formation. The advantage for SOCOM, which can be parlayed to the department, is the director of AT&L, the individual who does all that acquisition, does all that technology development, does the liaison, works directly for the commander. And so on a daily basis, we were torn between the current fight, the here and now fight, and the transformational fight. And so when you think, okay, that's SOCOM, and it's only 2% of the budget, pejoratively referred to as palm dust when I was a commander, so $13 to $15 billion a year. You can buy an aircraft carrier with that, by the way, just it's apples and oranges. But how the department could model that kind of approach with a lot of bureaucracy now existing in between. Mark Andreessen yesterday threw his hands up, well, at the end of the day, it comes down to bureaucracy. You need to assail the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is important. It's absolutely important in terms of continuity and understanding programs. But bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake that muddles this ability to leverage technology at the speed of relevance, not value added, not worth holding on to.
That's great, sir. I'm going to come back to you, General Thomas, and then we'll go to General Donahue for the next question. Can you talk to us? You're talking about bureaucracy and overcoming that and changing culture. Can you talk to us a little bit about what drove AI evolution during your time at SOCOM? And then General Donahue, I'll change the question a little bit for you, but I'm going to toss it over to General Thomas first.
I'll try and be quick because I want to hear CD's perspective on this. Literally a whack in the head for me. So within a month after I took over SOCOM, I'd been very, very busy and satisfied as the JSOC commander. Business was good and very satisfying, certainly with the teammates that I got to work with. But I got to SOCOM, and on a pause in the schedule, we had I forget what they called themselves at the time. I think it was the Defense Advisory Group or whatever. But it was my old mentor, Admiral McRaven, with Eric Schmidt from Alphabet and a couple others in tour. They came to visit. Short story, it's been written up in the New York Times, it's been bandied about. But on the way home on Bayshore Boulevard, Schmidt felt compelled to give me a report card on special operations. He'd seen us for about 2 hours. And he said, you clearly have exceptional people. I thought, check, if you took nothing else away, that is our distinct advantage. He said, you prototype pretty effectively. And I thought, yep, we've been failing fast long before I ever heard that term. But then he went on a rant about, you absolutely suck in terms of applied machine learning, blah, blah, blah. He went on further to say, I know you live in a complex world, but I think I could solve most of your challenges with advanced algorithms. He might have said quantum. At about that time, my blood was boiling a little bit, and I was ready to kick him out of the car. So I thought, no, you have no idea how complex our business is. Luckily, I took a pause. I was flummoxed. Admiral McRaven picked up the conversation, and it made me think for a moment. This is March, April of 2016, brand new in command. And while I didn't agree that he could solve all my problems, it hit me the whack of the head of, yeah, we're way behind on applied machine learning. We're doing nothing. So we went on a quick turn. We hired a chief data officer. We're the first ones to do that. Phenomenal officer, a guy named Dave Spurk, who just finished a stint as the Defense Department's chief data officer, who got in and worked right away at educating the force, kind of the first step. You need to understand what are we wrestling with here. And then we went for small wins, and it was aviation maintenance with the 160th and some other things, but it was intent on getting on to bigger, more muscular efforts. And the last thing we put in motion, and I think you'll come back to it later, was a thing called Maven. And I didn't know where Maven was going to go, but I made the decision, time, put resources in here, let's go. Let's go all in to see what we can gain from this relationship and from this approach. And I think we can talk about that later, but that's where we as SOCOM, certainly me personally, and we as SOCOM kind of picked up our stride for being an AI-informed and enabled organization and trying to leverage it going forward.
Yes, sir, thank you. And we'll come back to that later, but with General Donahue, I wanted to pivot a little bit more to you're doing the same sort of thing at 18th Airborne Corps, except you're focused more on data and kind of, I would call, ground level innovation. So can you talk to us a little bit about, how, what you're doing to kind of like push that at the command, as a command, and then, how's it shaping the way that your paratroopers and your, the men and women of 18th Airborne Corps do business on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, first, you don't have 3 hours, and I promise I won't talk that long. So the first thing is we use data for 2 reasons: make our people better, and the second thing is for warfighting. I can go on and on about people, but everyone who comes into 18th Airborne Corps, we collect all their data, right? And obviously, that way we can track what is their progress. The Army Combat Fitness Test, new test. Everyone comes in, they take it, and then we can sit there and watch how well everybody does. Are we actually implementing that? Because the Army Combat Fitness Test is way more than the Army Combat Fitness Test, right? You're introducing something new. It just told you everything changes every 60 to 90 days. Well, how well do we adapt? How well do we change? How well do we do stuff? So it tells you way more. Just that one data point will tell you so much more. As you look across, a person gets married. What's their performance look like? They have a kid. What's their performance look like? They have knee surgery. What's their performance look like? So you can start to extrapolate so many different things out of just that one data point. And I can go on and on about people, how we're using it to make barracks better. We have this program called Dragon Slayer, where young kids put in their ideas. Big shock, Southeast United States, there's a mold problem. So at Fort Stewart, one of the young soldiers said, well, why don't I just put a mold sensor in my barracks, right? So now we took that to scale. And now we have mold sensors in all the barracks here pretty soon, so that we can tell when we get to that point of, hey, there's going to be a mold problem. That way we can be a little bit more predictive and take care of it. Because candidly, we shouldn't be screwing around with that issue, right? There's other stuff that's way more important than that. So let's just use that data to eliminate the issue. And then warfighting, right? You talked about where does all this stuff start? Back when I was very fortunate to work with General Thomas and a bunch of other great teammates like he described, we'd go out and we'd capture all these people and all these computers. And we couldn't do anything with the computers, right? And then eventually people start to figure it out. But still, we couldn't collect that data and see in there was the answer to probably most of our problems. Mm-hmm. So data, and I know I'm known as the data guy, right? So if you look at it, that's the piece that it starts to truly help you out. And then when you talk about other stuff, large language models. I'm sure a bunch of your kids, I got 14-year-old twins, 10-year-old twins, and an 8-year-old. They're all using large language models, right? I mean, everybody's doing this right now. So if you now put in your FM, you put in your standard operating procedures, your manual that tells you how we're supposed to fight, right? You put in all your little processes and procedures, and then you put in the enemy situation. You put all that in there, it's going to kick you out an answer pretty quick, right? You've now taken hundreds of man-hours out if you start to do this right. So all these things are happening so fast, and nobody can keep up. That's the other thing, right? So, and then your adversaries are doing this. So it's not like we're the only ones that are running, they're not out there just remaining static, right? So you're going to have to figure out how you do that. Now, clearly, you could probably, you're not just going to sit there and accept it, right? You're going to do things to make sure that you can influence what they're seeing as well. And I'm going to keep it G-rated. I don't want to go to jail. Okay.
Makes for good coverage, though, sir. General Donahue, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about Scarlet Dragon, if you have we'd like to do that. Could you tell us a little bit about it? Kind of what's it all about, and what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll have some follow-ups for you on that.
Yeah. So the first thing is my predecessor, General Carrillo, the CENTCOM commander, he started it. And really the idea was he had a very specific thing that he wanted to address, okay, artificial intelligence, some other stuff like that. And what we did is we made it about, as we just kind of learned, is we said, actually, we're the contingency corps. We fight in the COCOMs. So we go out to a COCOM and we say, what is the problem you need us to solve? So we use that Scarlet Dragon to solve a problem for a combative commander. And oddly enough, we went down to CENTCOM for the first one and looked at a problem, and we used all the stuff that we've been watching and learning from the various deployments and everything that have recently occurred to start to make sure that anytime we show up, we can immediately use data, networks, artificial intelligence, whatever that COCOM's doing, we'll be able to immediately come in and provide a solution for them very quickly.
Thank you, General. And how does that fit into the larger JADC2 goals and objectives of the Army?
So obviously, you have Army Futures Command, General Rainey down there at Army Futures Command. We work, everything that we do in Scarlet Dragon is really hosted by him, and then our Forces Command and General Pappas, so that everything we're doing, we're integrating in our current systems, the systems we're developing in future systems, long-range precision fire, future vertical lift, all these other things, they're all built into this, so that we can make sure that we're pretty well harmonized going forward.
Yep. So one of the things I wanted to, this conversation has kind of made me think about my days in the 18th Airborne Corps a long time ago. And one of the key things that my team was responsible for was setting up the big command post. And that process took a long time. I don't want to say a full day, but half of a day. Lots of cables, lots of air conditioning requirements. It just took a long time. Given what we've seen the threat doing, given what we've seen in current ongoing conflicts, is that something that we need to continue to do, or do we need to adapt? And kind of, or what does your ideal kind of command post look like moving forward in future conflict?
I think everyone's watched what's played out in Ukraine, but if you are an early entry force, 18th Airborne Corps, soft force, people like that, or even if you're into pretty sustained campaigning where you're actively shooting with long range fires and everything, you're going to have to be very mobile. And if you just look at what we're learning right now, I would just say that you have to be very mobile. You have to be able to connect and disconnect very quickly. And the ability to, anyone who's been in the military, you know how hard it is to establish your communications once you stop and build back up. You're going to have to do that extremely quickly. So all that's driving you to much smaller, much more connected, much more, I think one of the previous guys talked about cloud infrastructure and everything else. So are you going to you're going to have your tactical cloud that you're going to bring with you. You're going to plug into an intermediary cloud capability, and then ultimately back to another capability. And that's all being developed right now.
Yep. It's really impressive. Back to General Thomas, I wanted to ask you a little bit about public-private partnerships. It's kind of been a salient theme through our discussions over the last couple of days. Could you talk to me about at SOCOM how you kind of broadened that culture, strengthened it, and why it's important?
Yeah, again, kind of a smack in the head. Enabled by our chief data officer, and I approved what he pitched to me, not really understanding the ramifications or the benefits. But he said, hey, I would like to bring in a few venture capital leads and some AI leading individuals, companies, get them under our tent at SOCOM, send them out to the Pacific, see what we're doing, and then come back and back brief you. Sounded like, okay, lawyers are good with it, and my lawyers had a tendency to get to no on most of those kind of initiatives, but they got to yes on this one. We sent them out there, and then I had the opportunity to get debriefed in the Pentagon. And one of the individuals is a guy I now work for at Lux Capital, Josh Wolf, came back and great outbrief. I mean, one, they were very, guess what? They thought we had amazing people. Good, okay, you're not the first to say that. They were giving me feedback on a number of things. They got a better appreciation. The woman yesterday talked about too many prescriptive requirements coming from the department and not an empathy for what's the problem you're trying to solve. We could do some great things together if we don't just go to script and actually hash through that. Well, anyways, they were outbriefing me. I could tell he was pulling a punch, and I said, "You're not telling me something. What is it?" And he finally let loose, and he's been pretty public about this since then, because I think he thought he was funny then, and it was funny, short of crying. But he said, "Your people are amazing. They absolutely get modern technology. They absolutely are on top of AI and what it can bring to bear. But your IT systems are so arcane, so anachronistic, you can probably never get there." And it was a gut punch at the time, because I knew, as soon as he said it, I thought, "Ooh, you're right. Our IT systems are terrible." And he went one step further. He said, "In fact, if I were your adversary, I would design the system you have now and just throw sustaining money at it, just so you stay on that." And then, so the good news is, we knew at the time, hey, we've got to make this change. And so the public partner, and I want to talk about it, or let Chris talk about how he's addressed that problem now, because there is positive motion. But the epiphany to me at the time was, we, SOCOM, had liaison officers in the Valley. I know Doug Beck very well. I'm pressing the I believe button one more time for DIU. I'm hopeful. I hope it delivers. But we had liaison officers in the Valley. We had them in Austin. We had them in Boston. We had them in Carnegie Mellon. We were chasing, the operative term being chasing technology, and we weren't bringing it back at the speed of heat. Our smaller units were doing it pretty effectively, and so we were trying to leverage, let's take that to scale, but we were chasing technology. And by bringing these technologists, and venture more importantly, because I think that can really be the mesh point that could be so powerful, by bringing venture folks into the command. And Dave has been a big proponent for warfighting commands. CENTCOM just organized their technology advisory group. My lawyers couldn't get to yes on that, by the way. Bad news. CENTCOM now is, but bring these people under the tent. You're flipping the paradigm where the private sector is now under the tent. It's almost a little bit of an onus transfer to them of, you now know our wicked problems. Come forth with this, with recommendations. Come forth with ideas. But it's magic, and I think there's an opportunity there to go to scale. But it's going to the hiccup or the challenge will be those warfighters don't have a budget. You've heard people talk about that ad nauseum here. We used to live in an OCO world in the Central Command with the active fights in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's gone away. Might bubble up in another future war scenario, but right now the paradigm is that money resides with the services, not necessarily with the warfighters. How does a warfighter drive technology, be that catalyst for change, but also have the pocket change to buy in to something that may drive larger scale adaptation in the department?
And just to dovetail what General Thomas was talking about, so the first thing is the integrated tactical networks. That's what's going to be in every brigade in the Army eventually. And that's really just, it pushes data. That's all it is, right? It's data versus all the other systems. So at the brigade level, you're starting to see that's occurring. And then what do you put at the division, corps, et cetera? But at the end of the day, that's great that the Army's doing that, but you have to do that in a COCOM, because that's where we fight, which means it has to be joint, it has to be coalition, and it has to be partnered, right? Afghans, partner. You look at any conflict we've ever had, you fight with partners. So if you're going to push all this data and you're going to do everything that we're talking about, and we'll get there, but you got to be able to do it in the coalition environment, a partnered environment. Clearly, we better get it right in the joint environment.
Yep, thank you. So I think at this point, I'm getting a fair number of questions from the audience, and I'm going to ask a couple before we go back. And one of the things I wanted to ask, the services sometimes have a tendency to develop new technologies and tactics in silos where operations are inherently joint. How are you working with your sister service components to truly utilize working towards joint solutions? I'm going to actually throw that one at you, General Thomas, from your time at SOCOM and throughout your career, and then General Donahue, if you have any finer points you want to add to that.
Again, advantage SOCOM. We were a joint force. We weren't fighting over service land. Did we have some tribalism inside our service components? Yes, but we were inherently joint, and so we were afforded kind of that advantage to think joint, to work joint solutions, and then obviously to resource across as much as we. Now the challenge would be if I didn't have the adequate resources, which service or services did I have to go back to cajole, for resources to to take it to scale. But other than that, again, it was a big advantage for us as a combatant command.
So anything we do is joint,
Yep.
right? Just as a contingency corps, everything we do is joint. Everything's going to be coalition. Again, everything's probably going to be partnered as an early entry force. You're going to go into some area where you probably don't have all the allies, and you're going to rely heavily on a partner. So everything that we do, every Scarlet Dragon is a minimum joint and coalition. Partner is a little bit more difficult, but that is everything we do 24 hours a day. In fact, the next Scarlet Dragon we do, the operations officer for that will be a Submariner 1-star.
That's fantastic. For the next one, can you talk, for General Thomas, can you talk about how SOCOM and the Army has closed the communication loop between requirements, owners, and warfighters and PEOs? And what has worked and what needs to be improved upon? Are we moving fast enough?
Yeah, again, I would caveat my information is dated. So 4 years ago, I'm a former 4 years ago. I would offer it was a daily struggle. Okay, the good news is we had enlightened Army leadership during my tenure that saw this as a shared challenge. We would try to make sure our program approaches were coherent with each other. I think some of you may know this, but we don't survive. SOCOM doesn't exist without incredible support from the services. Good example, our advantage in terms of transportation conveyances, whether they're C-130s or advanced helicopters, Black Hawks, 47s, come from the Army as a generic helicopter or a generic aircraft. We then throw SOCOM money to change it into a refuelable aircraft with enhanced capabilities, or changing it into an AC-130 instead of a vanilla C-130. But we don't survive without, again, the mothership, those services providing those platforms on their budget to us first and foremost. So there was a real tight tie. The harder part was if we had that one-off nuanced capability that didn't fit neatly in a service bucket, how we tried to describe that back to them. We'd cast ourselves as pioneers. We've even done that, I would offer, in the software side too, as AI pioneers and things like that, where we're hoping for Army, Navy, Air Force money at scale that can complement what we're starting at a smaller level.
General Donahue, one of the questions that I wanted to kind of talk to you about was the relationship with industry. I know that you're doing a lot, your command is doing a lot of really important work in terms of trying to reach into your service members and tap into that innovation, that youth. But how are you working with industry? What are some of the successes, and maybe what are some of the obstacles that you faced as you try to solve your operational problem?
The first thing is all of our, probably, I'd argue, on the officer side, captain and below, probably, staff sergeant and below in the Army, they all get data, right? They came in, they understand it. They may not understand all the buzzwords, but they grew up with it. They are, whatever you want to call it, digital natives, right? So to them, everything that we're doing, they're like, thank you, I'm glad you finally caught up, right? So having a force that's able to understand and adapt and use these things isn't that difficult. Okay, that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The next thing is we have a chief technological officer and a chief data officer at 18th Airborne Corps and down at the 82nd as well, and we're trying to scale that throughout 18th Airborne Corps. That's probably your link in with all your various businesses and everything, and then obviously you got to do it right. You have to have agreements, it has to be illegal, all the things that we always talk about. So all that makes it hard, and it makes it frustrating. And you just have to be absolutely, I tell everybody, if you're going to be part of 18th Airborne Corps, you have to be three things on the staff. You have to be a great teammate. People have to want to work with you. You have to be relentless, and you have to be unreasonable. If you're those three things, you can come work with us. And we expect that out of our industry partners as well. Be a great teammate, be relentless, and be unreasonable. And let's just have honest conversations back and forth. Let's talk about what we can do and what we can't do, okay? And then out of it, you know, the mission command system that we're using right now and experimenting with, it is over like 40 different vendors that are part of it, right? So that's complicated. 40 people is hard to manage. So eventually we're going to start figuring out what comes next, but pretty challenging environment, without a doubt. But we're getting better.
Can I jump on that one too? Because the evolution of chief technology officers, that's the term du jour. CDOs are arguably a little bit dated. You know, most everybody's got a chief data officer. We all jumped on the train. But this chief technology officer, it was played to me, and I think this is the right way to look at it. It's not for the technology, the specific technology that individual may bring to the command. It's the ability to bring their network and to translate to industry. This is my command's requirements. This is where you could help on the flow. So there are folks in this audience and in the larger audience who could actually play that role as a great CTO or chief technology officer, but it's less, you know, what you're bringing, and hopefully not necessarily trying to sell, although there are a few that try to do that, but how are you establishing that incredible network that will then avail itself to, you know, to the command that you're associated with. And it's powerful. If we get the right people, it's a great bridge.
Yep, so General Thomas, I want to come back to you. You told me one time, and it was an interesting conversation, that we have you were talking about blind spots in our technology, right? Not just in industry, but also in the Department of Defense. And you said that one of the problems was that disruptive technology, it doesn't come with a memo. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, and I mean, you could just almost Google that, and you'll see every historical example of where people were looking right at, you know, the future, and they couldn't embrace it, whether it was companies that went the way of the dodo or whatever. The more, you and I talked about this ahead of time, the more I thought about this, though, too, I want to flash forward a little bit. You know, we talked here recently about the opportunity specifically in the maritime space. We don't have enough ships. The Navy's got the same sort of recruiting problem that the Army does, so even if we had ships, you got to be, right now, you have to put people on those ships, but if it coulda, woulda, we go to a much more robust unmanned capability. Think of the mission sets that unmanned could accomplish, that we currently have gray holes out there. And I unfortunately feel the need to bring up a really provocative example when you think back to one of the worst plays in our history. When the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian Airbus, mistakenly, back in, I think it was late 80s, early 90s. I don't pretend to walk an inch or a mile in that captain's shoes. I'm sure he was under a lot of duress at the time, not knowing if that was an incoming bogey, bad threat, or whatever, and he made the fateful decision to shoot down an airliner. Put an unmanned capability out there in the Strait of Hormuz, doing what, you know, our gray holes are required to do in terms of monitoring transit and freedom of navigation, those sort of things. But an unmanned capability doesn't have that duress, doesn't have the fear, doesn't have the bias, literally can offer itself up, get blown out of the water, and we'll replace it with another one out there. Think of that opportunity and flash forward it to any number of places right now where we have humans in harm's way, under a lot of fatigue, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, potentially bound to make a fateful decision, and not even under the intense complexity of modern warfare. We have not had a full-scale modern warfare event for a long time. Ukraine is inching towards it, described earlier as a 21st century war with trenches still. So just a merger between leading edge tech and guys thinking that they're protected in a trench. Give me an easier target. You know, give me, you know, something, you know, it's almost not even worth going after if that's where you're going to hunker down. But ratchet it up to existential, you know, adversaries out there and the complexity of this decision making, and that's where I think it really drives, you know, the consideration for how AI enabled could we be to make decisions at the speed of heat, at the speed of now, do or die, and then paired with unmanned capabilities as well. that's, we're here now, and unfortunately, we're dawdling along, in my opinion, when we could be moving out a lot faster.
And scale, right? That's the other thing. As General Thomas just laid it out very well, and scale, right? That's not just shooting one vehicle, but how are you going to deal with 100 like type things that you have to determine? And then what's the ramifications? What do you do the next day? How do you resupply? Just the second, third, fourth, fifth order effects now are off the charts. So how do you model that? How do you know before you make that fateful decision?
That's very profound. General Donahue, I want to pivot now to the threat. I know that you probably spend tons of time thinking about the threat. Our adversaries are pursuing these same technologies. We're in a race of sorts. Based upon your experience and your current read, how is that pursuit, that competition, kind of shaping the way that you are preparing your units to fight combat tomorrow?
So I guess I'll keep this very G-rated. The first thing is you can't hide. The distances and the ranges that we're talking about have changed completely. And when you combine all that together, and everyone always talks about distributed, contested. Well, you're distributed, you're contested, and it's here. It's not some fictional thing. It's here now. So how are you going to deal with it, right? And this kind of goes back to, as a commander, you no longer have the luxury of just saying, well, we're going to figure it out. No, you're not. You got to figure it out today, right? Tomorrow we could be dealing with any contingency, and you better figure it out now. And if you're not putting the time and effort into it, to me the ultimate test is you have to, you all pay me ultimately to win. Whatever I'm told to do, win, right? So for me, it's pretty easy. It's a tactical and kind of operational level fight. It's actually pretty easy to win. I got great people, everything else, right? We'll figure it out. But when you start looking at huge scale and stuff, right, that's when we start to bump into problems. And Secretary Austin and Secretary Wormuth, they know this, right? They're the biggest advocates in the world for pushing all these things as well. But that's just the range and the speed and the ability to see everything has completely changed, and it's changing so fast, right? What's good for 30 days, 35 days may not be either. So your ability to adapt and integrate is really, really important.
Thank you, sir. General Thomas, you mentioned you hinted towards Maven earlier, and I've heard you say before that it was cathartic for the Army, for the military. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please? And I'm really interested in your thoughts about pushing the envelope and risk, and how that affects our ability to get where we need to get.
Yeah, and a few of the previous speakers have talked, and because I think I know where I peg out in terms of my biases of the risk of inaction versus action. So I have to actually rein that in more often than not. But I either was at JSOC or SOCOM when the decision was made, and much ballyhooed in the press, that Google was stepping away from the Maven project. And as you'll remember, we were trying to leverage the capacity, it was a requirement out there to try and really synchronize intelligence to give us a better picture, and I won't go into more details than that, but you can imagine the kind of decisions a commander has to make and how do we enable them. And at the time it was big to do. Google has stepped away, pretty prominent kind of news cycle. And the conversation that several of us had with the Secretary of Defense, ironically, was a time when it was the acting secretary, and he was pronouncing, hey, relationship with industry is really, really good right now. I said, well, hold on, just had a burble at least, if not it's a serious event with a massive company that's very important in terms of the big scheme of things. What's that about? No big deal, we'll recover. Now, first, I think we missed a huge opportunity to describe what we were after. Because at the end of the day, and as proponents of this, of being the leading edge of whatever the nation had us doing, and just win baby, was we were trying to pursue the most precise form of warfare ever imagined. Zero collateral damage. And I emphasize that with almost every audience I'm with, that for all the news articles and discussions of how we bomb indiscriminate and all, he and I have sat for days, months, weeks in joint operations centers pondering whether or not to take a shot, and the criteria was always, without exception, 0 collateral damage. Did we get it right every time? No, it was war, and we got it wrong. There was fog and friction, there was malfunctions of weapon systems, but our U.S. way of war was 0 collateral, and we were trying to progress, to pursue that at scale, with modern technology. So they stepped away. The interesting part, it was cathartic because as massive Google stepped away, a bunch of other people jumped right into the mix and said, we want to do it. We'll be part of this. And they filled the void. And that Maven, as it was prescribed back then, is now somewhat integral to how we're doing operations. I'm hearing great things about it, and it kind of makes me feel good that, great, we did have enough technology partners to get us to where we needed to be, and we're iterating off it now into the future to make it better.
Awesome. So we're running short, so I want to make it to the final question, and I want to talk a little bit about something that's non-technological. I want to talk about leadership, combat leadership in particular. As I have a good friend of mine, Rick, here, whose son is preparing to graduate from IBOLIC here in the next few weeks, prepping up for Ranger School, and he's joining the infantry. And he's, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, General Donahue, was what advice would you have for a young officer like Stan as he starts his career? And what does he need to be able to bring to his soldiers in terms of leadership skills so that he is able to lead them in modern combat?
Certain things don't change, especially at that level, right? The only people who do anything in the military, I'll just take the Army as an example. Companies, troops, batteries, ODAs. Everybody else sets the conditions or does something to allow them to accomplish whatever they need to accomplish, right? So that's the first thing. So he's at the level where they're going to have to do that. So the first thing is love your people. Okay, love your people means, that doesn't mean that you bring them in chocolate bonbons and make them feel good, right? That means that you walk up to them and say, hey man, you drink too much. Hey man, I don't know what you're doing, but stop it, okay? Hey, you need to work out more. Hey, you don't shoot very well, okay? So, and the other side is, I tell people with all this technology and stuff, right? Like, as a platoon leader, when he's out at the range, he should walk up to, a smart guy told me a long time ago, take a 3x5 card, right? And your kid should do this. He should take a 3x5 card for everybody in that platoon, put it on his phone, do whatever, and write down what are all the jobs they've had, what are all the schools they went to, what do they want, where do they want to be in 5 years, why did you join the Army? You'd be shocked what you'll learn by it. And then when you're out the range and they do something good, have their parents' cell phone number, FaceTime them, and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm out the range, and let me tell you what your son's doing. He's crushing it. Or, hey, your daughter, let me tell you how great she is. Thanks, right? So love your people. Celebrate them when they do great. They join the Army to do great things. Make them do great things, okay? And they can do great things. And then be really, really good at your job, okay? They should look at you all the time, and they should say, I trust that person with my life. I know they may not get it right. I know I may get killed. I know this happened, that may happen. But that person's going to make the right decision all the time. And don't worry about being liked. Worry about being respected. If you're worried about being liked, you're going to be a crappy leader. If you just know that, hey, just make sure that you respect me, they're going to be in a good spot. Okay? So if they do those things, really good at their job, not worry about being liked, just being respected, which means they'll do the right thing and they trust them. So it's all about trust, and love them. If your kid does that, they're off to a great start.
Thank you. Well, on that, I think that's a great way to end today's discussion with General Donahue and General Thomas. Please give them a round of applause.